Welcome to Sumbits, where we decode the PowerSchool development experience. Sumbits is brought to you by MBA. Let's start the show.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sumbits. We have an exciting one today that'll be a little bit different just because of a time change that we're dealing with. But as always, I'm here joined with Ryan Cockerman, Eric Scheidel, and our special guest of the day is Romy Backus. Romy joins us from Dubai. So today, as you can see, if you're watching us on the YouTube, she's joining us with a glass of wine. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm drinking some coffee today. We have like, what, a 10-hour difference, Romy? So this is morning for us, evening for Romy, so she gets to enjoy a little cocktail today. But today's episode is all about PowerSchool gotchas. But as always, we're not going to leave you hanging. We're at least going to let you know what we are drinking today. I'm just drinking some Colombian dark roast, my little pour-over carafe here. Nothing too fancy. I know a lot more about bourbon than I do coffee, but it's doing me well for this morning. What are you sipping on, Ryan?
Well, like my whiskey, I like my coffee strong and dark. So I did my French press this morning with some Kicking Horse coffee. The specific brew is 454 horsepower. The nice, bit of trivia about our MBA cup mugs is it holds the whole French press. So that's a lot of coffee. I made it extra strong because, it's an early morning, and cheers.
Cheers, Eric.
Well, I'm not as sophisticated as y'all. I got my Folgers Classic Roast going on here this morning, but I don't worry as much about the roast because for me, coffee is nothing more than a vessel for cream and sugar. So it's heavily loaded with the caramel creamer, and it's delightful. And I got to say,
coffee in your creamer.
I am jealous of our lovely guest here today. What's Romy got in the wine glass over there?
Romy has let's see if you can see that label there. This is a Chilean Carmenere.
Oh, I love Chilean wine.
A varietal that I really enjoy. And it has like it kind of has a sort of a coffee undertone to it, which fits perfect with what you are all drinking. So there you go. There's my nod to your morning.
Did you break the cork when you opened that bottle, or is it just a strangely shaped cork you got going on?
It's a pouring top. It's like
that's not the cork. I gotcha.
Yeah,
fancy.
So I don't all over the place.
So that bottle, my friends, just so anybody who's watching is about, I'd say, 4/5 full right now. I've submitted a challenge to Romy to see if we can have that bottle empty by the end of this episode. But I think she might have a little more self-control than to take me up on that challenge. But we'll find out.
And also for everyone who doesn't know, the bottle's about 10 hours away from us.
Right. Well, hey guys, like I said, today's episode's about PowerSchool gotchas, and I think it would be a good idea to at least go around the circle and kind of get a definition of that. I know we've done definitions of the title of the episode before, but I think this will be a good one. And just to make sure we're kind of on the same page, we'll start with Eric. What kind of comes to mind when you think about PowerSchool gotchas, especially in the development world?
You put me on the spot. I was going to feed off Ryan's answer, but
we can get Ryan first.
No, that's all right. You called me out. I'm going to make it happen. So for me, the PowerSchool gotcha, this harkens back, I think, to some of the conversations we've had in previous episodes. You can come into PowerSchool and you can be an amazing database administrator or web developer, but then you have to learn how to apply those skills in the context of PowerSchool. And it's awesome that PowerSchool makes its product so customizable, but in order to do that, they had to do some creative things with PSHTML and Xcodes and things like that. And I think the gotchas are thinking that you understand something and then find out that in a certain context it's not working, or something gets deprecated or updated, and that context you were using, that code you were using, isn't going to work anymore, or Another thing is just the PowerSchool schema, I think, is a gotcha.
Yeah.
So, again, when I teach SQL at conferences, I talk about, the main goal of those sessions is to teach people the syntax of SQL. But again, even if you come into PowerSchool as a database administrator and expert at SQL, understanding the PowerSchool schema, I always say, if you come in without any knowledge, I give you the data dictionary and I say, okay, I need you to write a query about the section enrollments. I'm going to start leafing through that bad boy looking for the section enrollments table, right?
Right.
But no, I'm going to find out after a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that it's the CC table in PowerSchool. So. Right. So I think they're at the mercy of some legacy stuff that's been around in PowerSchool for a long time. And I think the current developers would probably love it if better decisions had been made a decade ago, but they're kind of at the mercy of what they got in that context. That was a long-winded response, but I'll defer to my colleague Ryan at this time.
Well, one thing you made me think as you were talking there is, as someone new to PowerSchool, but, as far as databases like your SQL go, they're strong. One thing I found kind of interesting through this one, or Oracle Bible, is that virtually all the examples, and as I've looked through other ones too, they use schools. A lot of them use schools as the example databases and for all the queries, because I guess that is, relative to the fact you're learning and the content, it's the easiest thing. So it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, just because I think anyone who is really good with Oracle or has learned it has probably come in with one of those.
So you already knew to look for the CC table.
Well, it wasn't called the CC table in there either, but that's the thing. So I get what you're saying, but on a grand context, all you got to do is rename the table in a query from there. But for me, gotchas, what they are, we've all heard the term before. It's the tribal knowledge. It's that not always stuff that's been written down or that there's a definitive place to go to, but it's the stuff that gets whispered and passed along through the PSUG forums and at the PSUG events. And, you're all sitting at a table and someone goes, I wish there was a way to da-da-da-da-da. And someone goes, oh, well, all you have to do is da-da-da-da-da. And that's the stuff. And you're like, oh, wow. And you go write it down in a notebook, you do it. Still no one's recorded it officially, but now everyone knows it there. And, it's just word of mouth stuff. But hearkening back right there to how you said, knowing development, but trying to fit it into the PowerSchool world, it's all about those little gotchas, all those little workarounds, the PSHTML, how to use an Xcode. So yeah, it's just the stuff that gets passed through. It's not the grand knowledge, it's the little knowledge, little bits here and there.
Yeah, Romy, we know you well enough that you did bring a couple notes to the podcast today. So I'm sure you have your own thoughts on what PowerSchool gotchas means to you.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. It's definitely the things that are not completely intuitive about PowerSchool development. Right off the bat, I can think, like you were talking about schema, Eric, courses.id. Nobody uses that. It's courses.course number, but everything else is .id or .dcid. ID and DCID are not the same. Just all those kind of things that, you would think it's logical and it ends up not being.
How about schools? Schools?
Just say it. Right. School_number. Yep.
Same thing. Yeah. And then I would also add to that just common mistakes that people make when they're developing that is not necessarily something that PowerSchool has done wrong, but that perhaps the first reading of a function isn't quite what they would think it is, or there just seem to be a few common things that people make mistakes on over and over again. I can think, like, for example, rebuild custom page links. People think that it works some sort of all-encompassing customization magic, and if they run that special operation, whatever problem du jour they have is going to be fixed, and they're flabbergasted when it isn't. And you have to sort of explain that it only does a very limited thing.
for the sake of our listeners, what is that limited thing for the people that don't know?
What is it? It rebuilds the links on the custom menu on the admin side when you've dropped an HTML page into the student pages folder. Mm-hmm. And rebuilds the drop-down link in the backpack area of Power Teacher when you've dropped another page there.
I think it's called student pages there too, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yep. Here's a gotcha along that same vein. I found, because I develop in the custom web route and not in custom page management, and I don't know how applicable this is to a lot of our listeners, but for anyone out there that ever uses the custom web route instead of CPM, if you drop those files in those locations in the student pages folder, they will not be picked up. You have to put them in CPM.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. It's one of those you run around, and you're like, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? And that's one place where PowerSchool won't look in the custom web route.
Well, before we get too far into it, for our listeners that aren't familiar with Romy, I can't imagine there's too many, but Romy, I did mention that you're in Dubai. If you want to take a couple minutes and kind of go over, how long have you been in PowerSchool? We've obviously had an episode about how long we've been in it, and we've kind of bugged all of our other guests about how long they've been involved in PowerSchool. But what's your experience in PowerSchool, lengthwise and time-wise, and how did you end up in a place like Dubai?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my experience goes back to before I was even an adult. I actually was a student on the very first PowerSchool server that was ever implemented in Europe.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's about me in the PowerSchool world. So I was a student at Lausanne American School, which is a boarding school in the western part of Switzerland, which is where I'm from. And I was a student there from 2000 to 2002, and they implemented PowerSchool in summer of 2000, I believe. So pretty early in terms of schools adopting. And yes, I have a transcript on that server, and I have access to that server now too. So I can wreak havoc should I wish to, but of course I will not.
An A+ student like you.
I graduated from that school. I went off to the States, and I eventually. I'll skip the long part, but I took a PowerSchool job at Zurich International School starting in 2010. So I've been in the PowerSchool world for about 11 years now. Gotcha. You don't count that first student part. And, I shudder now to think of what a noob I was when I started out. And
hey, we all got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, we really do. But wow, I look back at some of my forum questions then and I'm like, oh no.
You want to delete them just so there's not record.
So I was in that role for 5 years at Zurich International School. And then one of my connections in the PowerSchool world here at the American School of Dubai, someone who had I've been chatting with here and there and who occasionally sent me some questions. She posted on PSUG Yahoo, back when it was PSUG Yahoo, and she posted a PowerSchool job. And they were looking really for someone specifically who had PowerSchool specialized knowledge. And at that point, I was ready for a change. And since she already knew me, and that helped. So that was my predecessor, and it kind of all fell into place. My husband Matt found a job at a school down the road. He's in tech as well, and it just within, I would say, I think within 2 weeks, it went from nothing to we're moving to Dubai.
Wow.
And it happened that quickly, but it was meant to be. And so that was in 2015, and I've been here ever since.
Well, you have to love it, otherwise you wouldn't still be there.
It's a good gig. I love my school. Dubai is a really dynamic, forward-looking place to live, certainly for travel, which I'm really passionate about. it's a great place to be in the middle of several continents. And yeah, we're pretty happy here.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Well, saying how you got started too, I just wanted to throw in. You're one of the first people I actually remembered from back in when starting PSUG, like going to PSU. Sorry, it would be in Steve Diebert or Diebert. It's Diebert.
I think
Diebert. Sorry, Steve. That's Steve Dibert's class, and you were always the keener up the front, answering every question. I know Romy knows here, but who else?
And that's when you realize Romy knows some things. Yeah, so obviously, being in an international school, I'm sure that introduces some gotchas of its own. Is there anything in particular that you can think of? I know what I would think of that you would say and answer this question, but what's a big gotcha that you deal with in an international school that us over in the States may not think about?
You are just baiting her to attack my code, right?
I am. That's exactly what I'm doing.
It is.
I was about to say, poor Eric, because he hears from me when when some MBA thing doesn't work with an international, need. He definitely gets the call. No, there's a few I could definitely have had to sort out over the years. One, of course, the big one that is fairly obvious is date format. We like our day, month, year, and America likes your month, day, year. And so PowerSchool does offer the ability to localize a date, but if you hard code your date mask into TLS SQL and then PowerSchool has things a different way, stuff breaks. So there are ways around that, but it's something certainly anytime when you're international and you put a customization on your server, you kind of have to keep an eye out for, like, oh, is this broken? Why is this broken? Probably if I have my date format changed, it's because of that. Another one.
The one that I was thinking of was what's your school week look like?
Yeah, that was what I was just about to say. You read my we have a Sunday to Thursday work week here in the UAE, and that's true of a lot of the Arab world. So that can cause some problems. Thankfully, PowerSchool implemented an option to set Sunday as the first day of the week a few years ago, which has been really helpful and has made a big difference, like in the views and quick lookup and for attendance. That's been really huge. But certainly that still comes into play sometimes with calendar-related customizations.
Sure.
And then another one is that basically non-English characters don't display in object reports and in some other places. So like Arabic, if you wanted to do a report card that had Arabic in it, it just turns into gobbledygook in an object report. So that's challenging. If you don't want to buy, additional plugins to do web-based report cards, I won't mention any specific thing, but
yeah, we try not to get salesy here.
Yeah, so those are really like three of the biggest ones that I can think of that people outside of the US face.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious. I'm an ignorant American, so I hope you'll forgive me. Your technology, your hardware, does your laptop look like my laptop, or the average UAE laptop look like my laptop?
I mean, I have a MacBook Pro.
Okay.
It has Arabic letters on the keyboard as well as our standard like QWERTY keyboard. So
okay.
So it's like
I've heard interesting stories from some of our international clients, particularly Asian. It's like someone says, well, this doesn't work on a Windows version for I forget. I'm not a hardware guy or an OS type guy, but they're like, it doesn't work in this situation when I have the Chinese based, and this is just going to sound really ignorant, Windows operating system. And I'm like, gee, I never tested that scenario,
Yeah.
And I don't know. I've never even seen, what the hardware how it might differ for some of those other countries. It sounds like in your case, it's pretty comparable.
I can't really speak to that either. I'm afraid. Like, I can't say I've encountered that.
No.
It intrigues me. I'd want to know. I'd want to understand more just to know why that happened.
Yeah, actually, if any of our listeners, because I'm not aware of those things either, but if any of our listeners do have some examples of that, we'd love to hear them. Again, we have an email that you can email us at. It's sumbits@mba-link.com. Reach out to us. We'd love to hear you.
I didn't even realize there was something. There was a difference in the operating system level. So, but I swear we got a support ticket regarding that one time.
Yeah, that's interesting. So going back to PowerSchool gotchas, Ryan, I think you had some ideas of some gotchas that you wanted to discuss today. Is there any big one that you can think of?
Nope.
No. All right. Well, that's enough for today.
Really, I mean, one of the big things. I mean, I don't have a specific one in general. It's just Xcodes. It's the Xcodes, and those are ones that are notoriously undocumented, but very helpful when you find it, when you come across them. And
but before we get into that too much, some of our listeners may not know what those are. So you want to.
So Xcodes are basically little tags that you'll occasionally see inside your PowerSchool web pages, like in the CPM, and they'll always be they're identifiable by a tilde, a square bracket, an X, and then a colon, and then some kind of word, string, whatever, and then a closing square tag or square bracket. And the quick description of what they do is they pull something from PowerSchool onto that page. Sometimes it's just a string, like here's one, X users _ DCID, and that'll just get whoever's logged in their DCID, which can be very helpful. Other times, and I can't think of one right now, but they'll bring in a full table, like a full method. And it'll render that on your page, and you'll be going through your CPM and seeing these, and you'll what does that do? What does that do? And usually you can kind of like trial and error, pop it in, see what happens. But other times it'll be completely innocuous and mystifying. But I guarantee you, someone has come across it, and there's the tribal knowledge part. And you just look to the PSUG forums, ask someone who's been doing it, and they can tell you. I've spent time in the past, and I've never actually compiled a list, but I'll take down the whole web root, like I'll open up the whole application on my desktop, and I'll just search for the Xcodes. I'll just search for it, see what I can find, and ones I haven't, because I'm always finding something new. What does this one do? That one's got an interesting name. Will that be helpful? Oh, that will be helpful. And I will throw out, there are a couple websites out there. There's one that's been out there forever. Actually, I've got it now that I think about it. Xcodes. It's a PowerSchool wiki. Let's see if that still pops up. I haven't been there in a while. Yeah, it's still there. So there's the powerschool.fandom.com. We'll put the link there. But this one's been up for a while, and it's got a bunch of little Xcodes on it. I don't think it's been updated in a while, but there are helpful little things in there. Output courses, course pick JSON, output course choices in JSON format. Actually didn't know that. Anyways, yeah. Or there's the actual dev site too, and it'll have a few of them. But like I said, then there's a lot that you're not going to find documented. You'll see them pop up in conversation, or you'll come across them, but that's a huge one to figure out, because they can be super helpful. They can cut down a lot of time, avoid you having to write a tiny little T-list just to get one piece of info that you can just grab with that Xcode that you can inject into T-list query.
They can obfuscate an entire, like, maybe 50-row piece of code that you actually want to modify, and now you have to rewrite the entire thing because you can't modify like the one small thing you want to modify.
Thank you, Romy Backus.
There you go.
Yeah. Like you just
codes, and I'm like, I don't love Xcodes all that.
Well, I don't say I love them, but you're right. And that is the exact opposite side of the coin there.
Xcodes drove me insane when I was first learning to customize because I would get excited like, I know how to add another thing in the select of T-list SQL. And I'd be like, great, here's a table. I can go and just add this one thing and then it'll be all good and my page will do what I want it to do. And I would get there and it's like X, blah, blah, blah. And that is all it is.
Or bridge render form.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well, before
render,
before we get into the bridge renders, I was going to say, so the Xcodes, but here we were talking about gotchas, right? So the gotcha is exactly like you're saying, you can't touch that T-list, that drop down, but the gotcha is, well, you can't. So now you got to learn how to do a page fragment with an insertion point. So, I mean, it's not like, hey, snap your fingers, make it happen, but that's how you deal with that.
There were none of those in 2010 when I was learning.
So if I can expand, I want to expand on Romy's point because Xcodes are great. There are a couple Xcodes that I use very regularly in my development. But to Romy's point, I got to say, I try to avoid using the more complex ones. I'll oftentimes use things like the user's DCID. Or another one that I use is user roles if I need to get my hands on someone's permissions, username, things like that. But for the most part, if I need to build something, if I need to build my own drop down, I think a perfect example of what Romy was talking about is the T-list child tag. And this is a tag that PowerSchool built to make it super easy for us to create a table to interact with one-to-many database extensions. When I teach database extensions, I mention that and just say I've never used it because it doesn't give me the control that I want. And it'll do a lot for you in the background, and you don't have. It's great because if you're not the advanced developer, you can use some of those tools without having to spend 8 hours learning a new skill to put in your repertoire.
They tried. Like you can build a drop down into a T-list child. Like they tried, right? Like it's not the worst, but you're right. It doesn't allow a ton of control.
Yeah, I think I tried it out once and then tried to use it like practically, and I'm with you guys. Like it's lacking, and
simplest of pages, it's not really super.
Well, and so, Ryan, you'd mentioned something about a course list, and I didn't know this was a thing. There's an Xcode that'll return JSON, course list in JSON format.
Literally just looking at it right now on the fandom site here, it's a course pick _ JSON, and it just has a description that it says output course choices in JSON format. I'm just looking at the, you can drill into it and it just shows the output. It's just, literally JSON with properties of name, desk, like description, and in context. And the context is a Boolean, and then the description is looks like the actual name of the course, and name is the course number.
Yeah, and see, something like that, my issue with that is I don't know exactly what's happening server side to build that. So if I need a list of courses, I'm going to throw it in a Power Query or in T-list so that my where clause...
You know exactly what you're getting. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to clear it up, definitely I use Xcodes myself, like I'm saying with the user's DCID, but I'm with you, Eric, on that. I've always tried to avoid using PSHTML whenever possible, and sometimes you have to work that unholy alliance with it. But for the most part, I'm not a big fan of something I can't control and that could change on me. And who knows when something's gonna change with respect to those things. And so that's gotchas, I guess, within reference to PowerSchool HTML. But then there's still just other kind of gotchas like everyone's encountered this one as of the past year and a half, 2 years. Is the cross-site scripting.
Oh yeah, that's a big one, of course.
Oh wow, yeah. How many plugins did that break?
everything. Really?
Yeah,
Romy, you have a lot of plugins.
Because it can be caused by so many different things, right? And that error message to the average person is so nonsensical. I mean, it really is. And that's not PowerSchool's fault. That's just it's a very programmery type thing that is there for good reasons and there for security, and that's a good thing. But it is a tough thing for the average customizer to be able to scan some lines of code and understand why they're getting that error. I mean, the level of frustration that I've heard about that error has just been through the roof at times.
Yeah, have you guys seen any like big indicators or big commonalities of like a major cause for that cross scripting error, or is it all over the board?
Angle brackets with strings.
Tags that aren't in order, angle brackets that are floating around. I mean, font sizes that aren't in proper quotes. It could be so many things. Like there's like at least 2 dozen common reasons why you might see that.
I would say angle brackets is I mean, personally, this is my opinion, but I would say that's the biggest violator. Whenever I've had to troubleshoot, it's been angle brackets. But I mean, definitely there's other things, but that one seems to be, to me, the one that pops up most.
So yeah, basically what PowerSchool is trying to prevent is people injecting code into a field, right? They're searching for HTML in what you're submitting. What confuses me about the cross-site scripting is they have it documented, and supposedly they have a bunch of tags whitelisted. But I've found, if I remember correctly, I found a lot of cases where I've got a whitelisted tag that PowerSchool screams about. Have you had anybody played with the whitelisted tags and found that they seem to be respected, or is that just my experience?
I'm definitely aware of that because it's an article on PowerSource, right?
Sure is.
Oh, I've avoided it
as well, but
yes.
The biggest thing. Sorry.
No, I haven't encountered that, Eric. But I mean, you do more dev than I do, so.
Yeah, I mean, I just take the unholy approach of if I need to submit something to a field in the database, and I know there's HTML in it, and I want it to be there. What are you all whispering about?
You're saying some bit, not submit, some bit.
Some bit. Thank you. I just, if I know that it's safe and I need this in the database, I find every instance of a less than sign, a left-hand angle bracket followed by a character, and I put a space after it. That will circumvent the cross-site scripting. And then if I know I'm working with this data, then when I pull it out, I find every instance of less than space and replace it with less than without a space. Now I'm ready to work with my info. So that way
for our listener, use this knowledge for good, not for
yes. I was just going to say, because in a couple of weeks, you're going to have 2 spaces.
Well, and maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe we'll edit that out later. We'll see. But, I think that's the case where, you put that information in, you have to, basically what we're trying to avoid is someone injecting malicious content. But in order for that content to be malicious, you have to retrieve it and explicitly put it back together in a way for it to be malicious. You know what I'm saying? So I think in that particular context, I don't feel bad like I'm breaking any rules going about things that way.
And I've had to do the same approach. When it came up and I was having to circumvent it, same thing. Because I've had exactly whole plugins break that was the same thing. I did a different kind of replacement, but the spirit was the same. Finding a way to identify your angle brackets, do a replace, and then do another replace down on the other end.
Where does this come up for you, Romy? Do you still do a lot of object reports?
Some. Definitely like transcripts of like student photo reports that teachers can run. They love those, like 20 student photos to a page with name and grade level. That's super helpful for them. Few different form letters. I don't have a ton, but I do have a few. The transcripts especially, I would say, are my most important object reports that I have. Yeah. It comes up in SQL reports. That's a customization that I use a lot. And just in other random places, when I'm being lazy and then I hit submit and I'm like, oh yeah. Yeah. I forgot about that.
So what other gotchas do you guys have in mind?
I mean, we could dive into T-lists in general. Well,
what do you got on your list there, Romy? Yeah, we got a big one on there that you want to talk about?
Let's see. I think, I actually have some visuals for you about gotchas.
Ooh.
Perfect.
So I brought some visuals. Let's see. Can I share my screen in this call?
Oh, I was hoping for like a Sharpie and some paper here.
I know. You got a tri-fold cardboard.
Let's see if I can. I don't know how well this
would be a new thing for the podcast.
Yeah.
I had a screen share before.
So let's do a screen share here. This one.
Nice.
Oh my gosh.
So this comes from painful personal experience.
So can we describe for those of our listeners who aren't watching the video?
Yeah, please do.
And I think for me, it's number 2, but.
So this has one, right? Everybody has one. So this was an experience I had early on in my PowerSchool days when I built some parent portal page. And when you are testing an SQL query, and back in those days, it was in SQL Developer, you can't use these dynamic PowerSchool tags in a query. You have to hard code a student ID in the query to get results. PowerSchool has to know which student it is. But when you embed a query in a page, you have to replace those numbers with a dynamic tag so that it loads for whatever student you happen to be on at that time, or whatever student the parent happens to be on at the time. And it was really easy to forget when you've got a query that runs, the number of the student is in there, and you embed it in your PowerSchool page and you hit publish. You look at that student and you're like, great, the data's there. It works. I'm
Yay.
done.
This is why before I'm ready to put a page live, because I know I work on the dev server where the school ID is 100. I'm usually working with Apple Grove High, and I know I'm working in the current year, which is 30. Before I'm done with a page, I do a search for 100 and for 30.
Aha!
Because I've done it before where someone calls and they say this worked fine last year, the page just broke this year. Well, it's because it's no longer year 29.
That's another one.
I've never thought. I like that.
The call I got that prompted that little meme was that, the principal called me and said, I have just heard from some parents that they're all seeing Joshua Smith's grades.
Oh, no.
When they log into the parent portal.
Were you at a rave when that happened, like the guy in the picture? I love that picture.
I was definitely out somewhere, and you have never seen anyone log into CPM on an iPhone faster. And I fixed that business on
quite a sobering moment, I'm sure.
Here's a fun one. So non-PowerSchool district, but in Manitoba here, one of our it made the news about a week or two ago. The report cards were sent out virtually, and it was very quickly found out that instead of kids getting their own report card, they got all the report cards.
Yikes.
So it was fixed in about 30 minutes apparently, and they said only 30 or 10, 20 whatever people actually logged in and saw it. And I was like, well, that's enough.
Yeah,
That's
enough.
a scenario that keeps a PowerSchool administrator in cold sweats at night.
Absolutely.
That's bad. You want to see another one?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Let's do this one here.
And again, for our listening only crowd, this is a meme that she's showing of the most interesting man in the world that says, I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production.
Well, the gotcha on this one is that people don't mark their test servers in a different way than their production servers. And certainly I've been gotten on this one before, where, you have a test server or maybe a couple test servers like I do, and you refresh your data, and now your test server looks exactly like your production server. And the only thing different is the URL. And what do? You paste your dev code into production. And then you wonder, first of all, why your test server isn't showing your updates. And second of all, why your phone starts ringing off the hook.
Oops.
Yeah. So the moral of that story is always color or mark or somehow flag your test servers so that you don't ever make that mistake.
I think there is a nice customization add-on Power Source Exchange that makes it a nice different color background.
Is that a Schmarson thing?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Oh gosh! Oh man, we did it again.
I was trying to not reference him this episode.
It's always a Schmarson thing.
Yeah. That meme, to me, it's not even as matter of like satire. For back when I was in my district, it was more of a statement and a fact. I just love to test it in the wild and see what happens sometimes.
See who notices.
Well, I wouldn't do it with like destructive operations, like things that were involved submitting to the database. But when it came to like, rendering data, Sumbit, I absolutely would. Yeah. Sorry, Sumbit to the database. What else you got there? You got any more?
I got one more. I have one more.
Love it.
All right. Let's open that up. It's kind of small. Hopefully you can read that.
This is classic.
Yeah.
So the story of this one is that string key not found is certainly a gotcha that gets a lot of people.
Yeah.
And what string key not found is, and certainly internationally as well. So PowerSchool built in a feature to localize text, which they intended initially to allow for translations of the system into multiple languages. That didn't really take off. Probably because there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 60,000 text tags that have to be translated, and that's a pretty daunting task for any school to tackle. But the long-term advantage of LTK, or Language Translation Toolkit, or Localization, it has a lot of names. The long-term advantage is that you can actually translate English text into other English text and have terminology and error messages and really whatever you want in PowerSchool show up as something other than what the default text is.
That's a huge gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, it's very useful, but the customization side of that is people look at the code and they see this text tag, which starts as like psx.text.something, something, something related to the page that it's on and the text that it refers to the database. And the intuitive thought is that you can just change the text in the tag and it will change the text that's rendered on the page. But that is not the case because that key that starts with a tilde actually refers to text in the database. And if you change the key, you break the reference to the text in the database. And the message that you get is string key not found. So if you search the forums, you get hundreds of messages of asking why does this or that or the other suddenly show up as string key not found. And that is the reason why, because text keys cannot just be edited randomly on a page. You have to actually create a new one that saves to the database first.
Yeah, and sometimes I'm amazed at the number of people that just ignore the string key not found. They're just like, oh, it showed up one day. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm not going to worry about it.
Yeah.
Have you seen the meme with from Spaceballs? So there's a meme out there from Spaceballs. I'm not going to say who posted this because I've already said his name once in this episode, and I don't want to give him too many shout outs. But if you remember the movie Spaceballs, there's a scene where they're combing the desert, and it's one of those Mel Brooks films. I think it's Mel Brooks. Yes, so there's these two stormtrooper-looking guys with a huge comb. So this guy posted the meme of these stormtrooper guys combing the desert and says, combing the desert for my lost string keys. And I thought that was just priceless. But I have a fun story about when I actually did use language translation once and offended somebody. So I was teaching at a conference and I had my dev server up, and someone noticed that instead of students, it said inmates on my server. And they're like,
oh no.
And they're like, that's really not funny. And I said, well, wait. First of all, you got to understand, we actually work with a prison that uses PowerSchool. And they used language translation, and it was a legitimate test to when language translation first came out. They want it to say inmates instead of students. So first of all, there was a legitimate reason I did that. And second of all, it is kind of funny.
Is it that far off? That's awesome.
I think there's a Sumbits related story to LTK, isn't there? Like when the Sumbits joke started, there was a plan to turn every submit button in PowerSchool into Sumbits, and so immediately the page fragment writing began. I mean, and suddenly somebody said, "Wait a minute, can't we just translate submit to Sumbits across the whole system in under 10 seconds?"
I thought
yeah, you can. Yeah.
I thought it was just a common script, though. I'm pretty sure whoever, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think they jumped into common scripts.
It might have been Vance, maybe.
Vance or Nick.
Yeah, I don't recall exactly, but I remember that language translation was secondary to page fragments until it popped up. So.
Well, and it's a challenge, too. You want to talk about a gotcha here. When you're talking language translation, here's a gotcha. You think you've translated students into inmates, but there's actually a separate string key for just about every page.
Yes. Oh, man.
So you don't translate it in one place and translate it across PowerSchool.
Yeah.
You've got to find all of those different keys.
There is a button. So you can search for the original text, and if you translate once you translate one of the keys, there's like a little green plus that shows up on the right side. And if you hit that, it fills that same translation into all the same keys that have the same default text.
Oh, I didn't know that was a thing.
Have the same default text, yeah.
Cool.
But then you'll get keys that are like students space, and that doesn't find it. Or like you have some tags that have dynamic data that has like curly brackets with a 0 in the middle that represents something dynamic in the rendering, and it doesn't find those. So you really have to hunt pretty hard if you want to do like all instances of a word across the whole system.
Huh.
Well, so a big one up in Canada a few years ago, at least in my province, was when we switched to provincially run report cards, and the whole K to 8 the K to 8 education changed to a lot of outcomes-based report cards. There was a lot of people that were very sticky on saying it's not a standard, it's an outcome. but we use standards as per the PowerSchool setup to do this. But they wanted, and in some cases, some of the districts did, to find every word of standards and change it to outcomes.
Huh.
And LTK was how we did that.
Yeah. That's what I've done with recommendations. My school doesn't want to call them recommendations. They want to call them eligibilities. So I have translated every instance of the word recommendation into eligibility or eligibilities across my whole system.
So in those scenarios, is there any documentation out there that shows all of the different text tags that you have to look for, or is it just a matter of going through and searching?
No, you have to search.
Yeah,
it's a general how-to on how to use it, but there's no case example on where it's helpful. Like it's presented as a tool to do the international languages. Not almost. I don't think it's ever been presented as a tool to do what it mostly gets used for.
Most people, yeah.
Unless you take my language translation class at PSIS, then I.
Nice.
Something interesting, a useful use case, if you will, for this. As I've become more cognizant of international date formats, I found what I've started doing is I actually went into our development server and created an alternate localization for Spanish. And I don't think I have all the string keys translated, but in there I can set the date format to the Romy date format. So now when I want to test my code, when I log in, I just select Spanish, and now all of my date pickers and everything have the Romy format. So that was a useful tip. I don't know how many of the folks listening to us are developing with internationalization in mind, but
the gotcha on that is that there are 18 languages that PowerSchool has provided default translations for the parent portal. So you're better off if you're doing it on production, which you shouldn't be, but in case you're accidentally doing it on production, that's another gotcha. You should choose a language that PowerSchool hasn't built in a default translation for, because otherwise your parent portal suddenly is going to have is going to be in Spanish if someone chooses Spanish.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But you still have your default though, right? Like unless I switch that language when I'm logging in, right?
Right. I mean, the worst you're going to do is make a language available to your parents and students, and they can log in and see the parent portal mostly in that language. But if you choose like Lithuanian, they'll have the option of English and Lithuanian, and they'll pick Lithuanian, log in, and everything's still going to be in English because Lithuanian isn't one of the languages that comes with PowerSchool for the parent-student portal.
Gotcha.
The dates will be in Lithuanian format, so that'll be correct at least.
Oh, how about currency?
Currency is a nightmare because at least last time I looked at it, there's no other currency symbols, and half the tags that show currency are like hard coded to the dollar symbol, and it's really a challenge. But I can't say I've looked at it in the last 5 years because I don't use fees or anything else related to currency in PowerSchool. So, yeah. I only checked it out once for a school that I was helping, and I told them to abandon all hope. But that was back. That was back in like 2014. So
they revisit every 5 years.
Well,
hey guys, unless there's any big gotchas that you want to discuss further, I think we could talk for days about the number of PowerSchool gotchas when we're talking about standard web development versus PowerSchool. But especially for the listeners, if there's any gotchas that you guys have, maybe we could convince Romy to join us again for another gotchas episode. But for now, I think we're going to call it a day. Again, that email address is sumbits@mba-link.com. Romy, thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully we can get you back on again sometime. How'd you do on the bottle? How far'd you get?
I'm about halfway through. Yeah, not too bad.
Not bad at all.
Halfway
Maybe
through.
you can
And I'm
practice
going to finish this class with my dinner and then probably call it a night because tomorrow is still a work day here in Dubai. So
Perfect.
I have to write halfway functional code without too many dots.
All right, guys. Ryan, you want to give the outro? Let us know about next time.
Next time on an all new Sumbits, we're going to interview a man, Nick Peronti.
All right, guys. See you next episode. Thanks again, Romy. Cheers.
Bye, guys. Great to see
See
you.
you next time.
Thank you, Romy.
Thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Enjoy more episodes and learn more at mba-link.com.